We've been diving in to Daniel. This is the end of our 6 weeks, 12 chapters of Daniel. It's been a lot of craziness of going through this. You know, we talked about Daniel in the lion's den. We talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We talked about all this. We got into Daniel's crazy dreams. And We Are the Champions was like the fitting end to this, because in the end of Daniel, as we're going to discover, it talks about the fact that God wins, we are the champions. Like if you're a Christ follower, the power that you have in that. So to me, it was just that perfect. There was a little debate on, what our fun song should be. Jamie wanted It's the End of the World as We Know It, and that would have been a good one too, but I just felt like getting Queen, and I know my wife well enough to know she would get into Queen a little bit more, so I set her up to, why are you looking at me like... There are speeches out here. Yeah, I know, but right, so we've got into this. So we talked a little bit, if you were here last week, on Daniel 10, and Daniel 10 set up for 11 and 12 that we're going to go into. So when I was in college, I had a college professor for public speaking that said, the best speeches are the ones that you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. If that makes sense. And I went, okay. And so I feel like 10, 11, and 12 are like that. Daniel 10 that we talked about was talking about Jesus. Like Daniel had a vision. This is 500 years before Jesus even comes. Daniel has a vision about seeing Jesus, and he talks about what's going to happen. So that was kind of what's going to happen. And then 11 is what's currently happening. And then 12 is going to be into the future. So just to understand that, we're going to dive in. It gets a little complex, but I'm going to do my best to kind of help us walk through that. So Daniel 11, he has this vision that's continuing. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided into 4 winds of heaven. But not to his prosperity, nor according to the authority which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So, you have to first understand, this is a vision. This is, again, before it's actually happened. Daniel's having this vision. Now, this part of the vision has already happened in our history. This part is what we know as, you may have heard in history, if you're a history buff, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, he had a vision. If you were here a couple weeks ago, Daniel had a vision talking a little about Alexander the Great, but now it's going into great depth. Alexander the Great died at a very young age, if you know the history of Alexander the Great. There's a couple different theories on, he had... The theory that I had in my history was he overdrank himself and passed out and died from doing that and got very sick. So there's lots of different reasons of Alexander the Great. But the part that I think is really unique as we go through here is that if you go through Alexander the Great and just how complex and how the Bible all interweaves together, right, is there's parts of this that Daniel wrote before Alexander the Great ever even lived. And Alexander the Great, part of his group that was around him actually showed him the writings of Daniel. So if you follow history, I think it's kind of cool that Alexander the Great, not that he was a nice guy to everybody, but at least God's people, the Jews, he treated them far, far better than everybody else. And part of that was because he saw Daniel's prophecy, he saw these dreams and went, wait, that's me. I'm going to do everything I can not to make, God's people mad, because Daniel's talking about me here. He's talking about how the power that came out of this. So, again, Alexander the Great passes away. He goes through all of this stuff, and his kingdom's divided into the 4 different kingdoms that's talked about there. Now, there's 2 other kingdoms that we're not really going to talk a lot about. They're up there. They're out of the way. They're the ones that are not as powerful as you read through Daniel 11. He talks about 2 of them that are going to be the king of the north and the king of the south. So the king of the north, the king of the south, and as we go through Daniel 11, 6 through 21, I'm going to recap this as quick as I possibly can. It's about 130 years that they fought back and forth. There was alliances between the 2, Part of the alliances were marriage, kind of like, one person from this kingdom married this kingdom, so now we need to get along, because you always get along with your in-laws, right? I love that, like, literally every guy was like, yes, you do. Like, there was like this head nodding. And because the speakers aren't out there, my father-in-law is not peeking around the corner. Like, you always get along with your in-laws because of marriages. But then wars between them started happening. There was a victory from the king of the north. There was a comeback victory from the king of the south. The king of the north took control of the promised land. That's that little part of Israel right there in between the two. There was more alliances that happened because of marriage. And then there was an anger from the king of the south because he lost. So much of this, you have to first, let's just take a pause here. You have to understand that so much of this is powerful because Daniel wrote about this long before it happened. And when you go through this, the power of like the details that Daniel got right in this vision, if you don't believe in God, if you're not a Christian, there's literally no other way to do this than to say somehow this was written after. Like, we must be tricked, because there's no way that Daniel could have written this so many years before and have it come to exact truth of what would happen, right? Like, I mean, to me, as somebody that's a Christian and believes in God and believes in the Bible, like, there's no other way to look at this other than it's a God thing, right? Like, and you have to understand, too, the first point I want you to take away so far in Daniel is God has a plan and a purpose for your life, not just these kingdoms. God orchestrated this vision to Daniel so perfectly that you can't help but just go, wow, that's amazing. God is interweaving your life, your personal life, the exact same way. He's orchestrating your life the exact same way. It's not just for these kingdoms. It's literally each and every one of you. Like, there's power in that. So as we continue into Daniel, Daniel 11:21, it talks about, in his place, this is out of the king of the north, there became a vile, an evil person to whom the royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom of flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. So we get back to this map. So what's happening here is out of the king of the north, it's now comes out, and we know again because we can look back on history, it's Antiochus the fourth, who was a guy that took control, and he came out of that area of the north, and he took control, and he took control by he pretty much gave himself, he self-proclaimed that I am in charge. So like the history of it, like, again, follows exactly Daniel's thing. He came out, Antiochus pretty much said, I am in control, I am the king, I am doing this. And he came and got a huge army, and he swept down through the south. And history tells us he went down there, and literally the only reason, it's not here, the only reason that he got stopped was the people of the south, they ended up bringing in the Romans to help them. That was the only way that they staved off this, right? So he brings in the Romans, he ends up getting really mad, and he goes back. So Daniel continues over and over through this and the history of this, and Daniel in his vision says that this guy, because this is long before it all happened, this guy is going to leave, and he's going to start destroying stuff. He's going to be upset. He's going to do all this, and he goes into such great detail that exactly that happened. As Antiochus left, he killed 80,000 people. He took 40,000 as slaves. He took gold. He took jewelry. He did all of this stuff. And I want you to, in the middle of all this, like if you're reading this and if you read this week, you're probably going through this going, what in the world am I even reading? Like, yes, this is the history, but it's just crazy. And then in Daniel 11:32, as he's leaving, he says, he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. And this is a part I want you to hold to. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. The people that know their God. So as this is happening, as all these Jews, all of God's people are being killed and taken into slavery and all of this stuff, the vision of what happens that Daniel talks about and actually did happen in history is people that followed God stood firm. People that followed God said, you know what? I'm standing firm in my faith. And there's so much power in that these guys, if they can face all of this, and just like the song we just sang, if they can face their giants, the power that must have been there, right? Like, it's just so powerful. And then as we get into 11:45, and he shall pitch his pallets of tents between the sea and the glorious Holy Land. Yet he shall come to his end, and none to help him. Again, the theme of Daniel over and over again is these kings, all these people saying, look how great I am, right? Like, I am powerful, I'm all of this stuff. And really, at the end of this, even the most powerful of all these people that they talk about, in the end, what happens? He's left. None would help him. He was by himself. He doesn't have God's power. To understand, and as we read through all of the 11, if nothing else, if it confused you, if it went on and you're not the history buff or whatever, and you're just like, what's the point? Why are we going through this? Is this right here? If nothing else, Daniel 11 should give you confidence. God orchestrated and planned out and perfectly planned this out and watched over his people, and he does the same for you. We may get lost, we may get confused, but God plans this out so perfectly. He works out his details. This should give you confidence. Like reading this, I'll be honest, like reading through this last week again, and that's what I left with. I left with this confidence of going, wow, God, if you literally can give Daniel a vision and a dream, and he can write this vision and the dream that can later become actual history, and we can look at that, and we can say how perfect all of the details that you lined up, then I guess I can't get concerned about the little things of this world. I can't get concerned about my stuff. Yes, they're big to me, and yes, they are heavy, but I can't worry about that. So looking at this through hindsight, we can say how perfect it was. We have the vision of hindsight that we can look back and go, wow, it really did. And God uses that confidence in each of us to go, you know what, I do have you. And I believe God still does that, where he walks through stuff. And maybe that's just me, but I'll walk through certain things and I'll really struggle, and I'll be like, oh, God, I don't know how I can face this today. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do all of these things that are on my to-do list. I don't know how I can face, or there's a situation with somebody that we're not getting along, and I don't know how I can face that. And then I read this, and it gives me confidence to go, God, you have it. So now we go from 11, which has happened, to now the final chapter of Daniel, Daniel 12. And this is the chapter that pastors stay away from. This is the chapter that people are nervous about reading, because you're like, this gets so confusing, because this part hasn't happened yet. This is the part of Daniel's vision that he writes that there is no lineup for. There are some people, yes, you're going to find people are like, yep, we're in this. This hasn't happened. This is the end of time stuff. This is a part of Daniel that we look at as believers and say, one, seems overwhelming, and two, seems very, very scary. So Daniel in this vision, he's sitting here and he has an angel come to him during this vision. And the angel is called Michael. And Michael comes and has this entire conversation with Daniel back and forth. And he says, and the angel says, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, and some to everlasting life, and some to shame, and some to everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So he's talking about here, this is the end of the times. This is the scary part that I struggle with as a pastor, because I want to be honest and I want to share with you guys this part of Daniel. This is how the world as we know it is going to end, and this is how all of this stuff, and this is used too much as a scare tactic. As a kid, it was someday the world is going to end. Do you know? Are you right with God? Are you and it's used as a scare tactic instead of going the confidence. So I want you to read this and to understand this is, again, the confidence that we have in the belief that we should have. And then we continue on to Daniel 10. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined. But the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. but those who are wise shall understand. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allocated place at the end of the days. So it talks about the fact that we live in a world that is maybe a surprise to you. We live in a world that's sinful. We live in a broken world. Whatever word you want to use, we live in a world that's full of sin. We live in a world that is, I don't want to say is evil, but for lack of a better term, we live in a world that's evil. This is not heaven. We live in a world that has a lot of bad things. We live in a world that people have cancer. We live in a world that is falling apart. We live in that, and to understand that we live in that world, but to understand that there's something beyond this life that we have. It gets super scary. We look in that, and I had a fear as a little kid of all sorts of stuff, because I had a pastor that did this scare tactic and went in and said, do you know this? Do you know where you're going to go when you die? Do you know this? And it was so heavy. And instead of looking at it as a scare tactic, look at it as hope. Look at it as obviously there's a reason you are here today. You're in a church service, believe it or not. Yes, we sang We Are the Champions, but you're in a church service, right? Like you have something, and we're searching. We're in a world that is searching for something. We're in a world that can't help but get in its way. And one of the things that I hear a lot of people say is they talk about so just flippantly, like heaven and hell, like, oh yeah, like hell's this really cool place that we're going to go and party, or we're going to do whatever. And it's like, no, that's not what, like, you've taken and commercialized those two things instead of understanding that it's your life, and it's our job to accept Christ. It's our job to live in that faith. It's our job to accept, and accepting Christ, for me growing up, looked a certain way. It looked like me going, following the pastor with this prayer of, do I believe in Jesus as my personal Savior? Yes, like you go through this stuff. But accepting Christ can look many different ways. And that's all that he asks us to do, is accept Christ, to accept him into your heart, to live a life. It doesn't expect us to be perfect, but the entire idea is that we accept Christ and we try to be more Christ-like, that we try to do that, and we accept that free gift. And we've talked about that. And it's not a thing like, you accept Christ or you're going to hell. Like, no, that's not, like, do you understand? Like, it's not that scare tactic. It's about a relationship that we want. And Daniel's talking about that, and he in there, it's why I think 12 is so beautiful, is he sits there and he goes back and forth, and the angel says, enough is enough, be done with it. And Daniel goes, but no, I have questions. I want to know how. I want to know why. I want to know what. I want to, like, and he sits there, and the angel's like, just continue to live your life. Daniel, you're doing things right. Daniel, you're following God. Continue to do that. Continue to tell other people about it. Continue to share that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't get caught up in that detail of, oh, am I going to heaven? Am I going to hell? Like the scare tactic of, did I say the right prayer? Did I do that? I tell you, as a fifth grader at camp, I sat at camp, and the guy was talking about heaven and hell, and he was talking about accepting Christ. And I sat there and I freaked out, and I went, and I didn't have parents to ask. I was embarrassed to ask my camp counselor. And I sat there and I was like, wait, did I say the right, did I do the right thing? And afterwards, I found out later, as one of my brother's friends that was working at the camp sat there, and he came up and he put his arm around me and he said, what's going on? Because he could tell I was like, I don't know if I said the magical phrase to get into heaven or not. And he looked at me and he said, it's not like that. Yes, there is a heaven. Yes, there is a hell. It's talked about. Do we know the exact details? No. But there are two things, and you have to make a choice. But by you sitting here so broken shows me that you've made that choice. And I said, well, when the guy up there was speaking, I don't know if I said all the right words. And he goes, you don't have to say all the right words. It's what's going on in your heart. God is going to judge what's going on in your heart. And he goes, I don't know what the entire thing looks like. You don't know what the entire thing looks like, but you're judged by what's in your heart. You're judged by that acceptance. Does that make sense? Like, right? Like I'm not up here to talk about this. And Daniel was nervous because he had all these details about heaven and hell and this confusion. And I just look at how we're doing it and I feel like we've gotten it wrong. The idea is that we're drawing closer to God. The idea is that our faith is in Him. The idea is that we follow, not that we're perfect. The idea is that we tell others because we share that. We can't help but tell others because a relationship with God helps us walk through this earth. So this last week, it was really awkward. I went on a date, but it was not with my wife. I got asked to go to a movie. Adam Cyan and I were talking, and this new movie, Jesus Revolution, came out, and I found out it was still in the middle theaters, and I wanted to know a little bit more about it. So Adam, I had a couple meetings that I had to go to, and so I told Adam I'd be coming in. You know, it's 12:35 start. I'll meet you at 12:30. So, of course, most of you that know me know that I got there at 12:36. And I'm trying to get, like, my ticket, all this stuff, and the guy, he goes, it was really kind of funny, too. The guy tried to explain to Adam Cyan, like, not knowing him. He's like, was the guy about, like, this tall, wears a ball cap, you know, has, like gray in his beard, but yet, like, this, like, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, yep, he's like, he bought your ticket already. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I go in, and I'm, like, trying to pay Adam, and of course, Adam, because he knows how to go on a correct date, he got me the reclining seat and the heated seat. So, and he sat there, he's like, I got you a water, and I got you popcorn. Like, I was like, I kind of feel like I'm embarrassed to tell Jamie, like, I'm on a date. Like, I don't know, is Adam expecting me to hold his hand during this? Like, how's this movie going to look, you know? But we got a chance to watch this, and both of us the entire time were just quiet during the movie. Because the entire movie is about, back in the 70s, a pastor out in California that his church was just dying. And his daughter was one of the only, like, young adults in the entire movie, entire church service. And she comes across a hippie that she brings the hippie home. In this, you can imagine that time of the 70s, like, the dad was not happy about it. And then he has a conversation, and the guy says, there's an entire people that are hippies that are looking for God, and they're looking for something, but they're not welcome in churches. And so he invites them into his church and the entire thing. And, you know, there's people in the church that look and walk out and say, like, you know, the elders are like, it's either them or us. And, you know, they walk out. And it's just an entire thing of, like, following God. But the thing that Adam and I talked about afterwards was that's what the world that we're living in. It hasn't changed from the 70s to now. We live in an entire world that is lost, hurting, and broken, that are looking for God. And they're doing it in many different ways, and some of them the same way that was in that movie, but lots of ways it's just now 2023, and it's the exact same thing. People are searching for God. They want to know what is this, and they're looking and they're trying different things. They're trying alcohol, they're trying drugs, they're trying whatever other things to try to fill that void that they need. And really, the entire story goes through and talks about that, of an entire movement that happened in California that is now spread all around the entire world, and there's Calvary Chapel churches all around the United States, all because this one pastor was willing to say, you know what, you're welcome here. And there's one of the lines that I love, that the guy's sitting there, and, you know, the side of the church that the hippies are on, the side of the church with all the traditional church people, and the one guy sits there, they're all sitting on the floor, and it's more and more and more, and he looks and he goes, hey, pastor, I think we're going to need a bigger church. Right? Like, and it's just growing because people are searching. So I guess what I want you to understand, and I want you to take from this entire moment and this entire Daniel, is we go through Daniel, and Daniel shows over and over and over through the entire book of Daniel, he shows how God will give you confidence. He shows how God is there. He shows what faith looks like. He demonstrates that in everything he does. But the end of Daniel, there's no other way than I can put this than he shows us how do you prepare? How do you prepare for the end? It's about a relationship. It's about understanding that you need God. It's about understanding that God so badly wants or desires to have a relationship with you that he would do anything. And Daniel shows that time and time again. He brings you in, And God is there and walks through the fiery furnace. He walks through the lion's den. He walks through all these dreams and visions. And as close as Daniel was with God, he still is in awe of what God has. So I don't use talking about heaven and hell as a scare tactic. I don't use the entire idea of that you need to accept Christ as a scare tactic to say otherwise, you're going to go to that really bad place and da-da-da-da-da. But I would not be doing my job as a pastor if I didn't be honest with you and say, you need, whatever that looks like, you need to have that relationship with God. You need to accept God as your personal Savior, whatever word you need to use. And going back to that movie, there's a beautiful spot where all these guys are coming down and they're getting baptized in the ocean and all of this. And I'll be honest, I watched it as somebody that grew up in the church, and I kind of got mad. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. They didn't say the right prayer. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. How dare they get baptized? How dare they, and then I went, no, I've made it too complicated. My faith has made, my history of what church looks like has made it too complicated. And there's a beautiful spot where this guy comes down and he's the night before been on influence of stuff, and he's doing all this, and he walks down, and Kelsey Grammer, which it was a little hard for me to see Kelsey Grammer, the guy that plays Frasier, as a pastor, because I still look at him as Cheers and Frasier and all that, and now I'm like, nope, he's a pastor in this one, right? Kelsey Grammer's in the ocean, and he comes, and he looks, and he just simply looks at this guy, and he asks the question, do you believe? Are you ready? Are you ready for this? He doesn't go through and say, did you say the right prayer? Did you do this? Are you committed to going to church at least 2.5 times a month for the next 6 years? He didn't ask those questions. He didn't do that. He instead just said, do you believe? And the guy said yes, and he goes, let's go. And he baptizes him. And he says, you are now changed. You are now, that's an outward sign of what's going on in your heart. That's what baptism is. An outward sign of what's going on in your heart. And it's so beautiful. And as a church, we're going to, once it gets a little bit warmer and hopefully stops snowing, we're going to do baptisms here because people have talked about that. And it's an outward sign of what's going on. So I just want you to be thinking, what does that look like? How do you prepare? One, have you accepted Christ? And if you haven't, come talk to Jamie or I. Come, let's talk. And let's talk. If it needs to be today, if it needs to be this afternoon, if it needs to be Wednesday at Entre Amigos, I can go back for some good Mexican. I don't care. Let's talk. If you're in a spot where you're no, I've done that, but I'm ready to make that outward sign, let's talk. We're going to do some baptisms. Let's talk about what that looks like for you. Because it's all about this faith journey. And I've loved hearing your guys' stories. I've loved, I'm looking around, and many of you, I've had those conversations of how you've ended up here, but how your faith journey has brought you to this spot. And some of you say, it's time for me to take another step forward. It's time for me to change this. It's time for me, God's calling me to do a few more things. It's those conversations have happened. Let's talk. Let's figure that out. Let's walk through this like Daniel did. My hope is that it doesn't get lost. In all of the confusion of this, and as we wrap up this entire Daniel series, let's not get lost in those details. Let's go forward and work and spur each other to greatness. Pray with me, won't you? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for a chance to just talk. Thank you for the yumminess of soft pretzels on this cold day. And God, I just pray that you will be with us in whatever part of that story we are. Whatever part of our faith journey we're at right now, I pray that you will be with us. Walk us to that next step. Walk us closer to you. Walk us in a deeper relationship with you. God, we ask that you watch over us, be with us, guide our steps. And if there's people here today that go, I just don't know, God, I don't know you like John's talking about, then God, give them the ability and the strength to come and talk to me or talk to somebody and be ready to take that step. Or if there's people that are going, yep, I want to try this baptism thing. I want to outwardly show what's going on inside my heart, then give them the ability and the strength to come and talk. God, if there's people that are just dealing with so many things that they can't even fathom right now, that's what this church is for. A healthy place to come and to have those conversations. May we continue to spur each other on in our faith. so that we can show people you in all that we say and all that we do. It's in your name. Amen.